benefit of group work that you're going to see at your agencies is probably that your agency wants you to be able to see more clients at the same time. But there actually are other benefits, even if we're not thinking about funding or agencies. The benefits of group work really are that people have real-time experience to be able to kind of work out their problems with an interpersonal context. So the kinds of relationships that they're having outside of the group in their personal life will kind of replay in the group. So they're learning those skills and they're able to kind of bounce off of each other. They're able to practice and they're also able to call each other out. So some challenges with group work. Obviously, when you have more than one client, then you need to figure out how to monitor what's happening with everybody. You need to be able to kind of distribute your attention amongst multiple people. So they use a word in the textbook called casualties, which is kind of dramatic, but I sort of like it. It's like the group process may be dead for some people if they aren't able to get what they need. So this little quote here: casualties can occur far more easily in group sessions than in an individual session because the leader has considerably less control over the proceedings. So this is also why group work can really scare a new social worker or someone who's maybe a little bit more shy. There's just a lot of people, a lot of different things, and a lot of unexpected stuff can happen. So it's not just the relationship between you and your client, it's between you and one client and each other, you and another client, maybe that client seeing that relationship that you have. There's a lot of different dynamics that are happening. We also can't really guarantee safe space or confidentiality. So I'm going to kind of go over that at the end of how we can make those kind of group norms and make those group disclosures without telling people things that aren't necessarily true. I don't think it's a good idea to tell a group that something is a safe space if you can't 100% ensure that that space will be safe for them. Also, when you have members of a group, there are people who have different ideas, different mentalities. There will be people with different identities. So not just racial, but gender. There's like maybe people who are belonging to the LGBTQ community, maybe some people who have different opinions about that, different religions, different cultures. So there's a lot of different challenges within that. Even in a group that appears on the surface to be homogenous, like maybe you have a group that's for migrant mothers, right? And so everyone in that group has like Mexican ancestry. There's going to be a lot of variation of beliefs within that group. There's going to be people from different regions. There's going to be people with different belief systems, maybe a little bit different religious take. There's going to be people with different family systems. So you have to just kind of ensure that that's able to be talked about, but also that nobody is feeling excluded or marginalized. Okay. So avoiding casualties. I would say prepare. That's a really good thing. You can't quite prepare for everything that will happen in a group though. Me as a person who likes to prepare, that's something that always made me a little anxious. You just don't know what's going to happen. Somebody might not show up. Somebody might show up late. Somebody might start swearing. Somebody might be drunk. Hopefully not. These things do happen though. What really I would say is the best thing is just to be able to have kind of an open mind and also just have an attitude that you will address things as they come up, that you'll keep them in mind, that you'll be respectful when something happens, but you can, in the process of calling out behaviors, you're actually modeling to the clients a way of calling out someone's behavior that's respectful, because a lot of times clients don't know how to do that. A lot of clients only know maybe how to call out behavior in like a very rude or like a more violent way, like don't do that, like getting aggressive. And the polar opposite end, some clients don't know how to stand up for themselves at all. So if you can have a way in the middle where you can gently redirect someone, everyone will watch you, which is a scary thought, yes, but you'll get better at it. Saying something like, that's not a respectful comment, let's use this word instead, and just moving on, that's a really restorative moment for clients to see. So like acknowledging that confrontation will happen, that it's natural, but it doesn't have to be the focal point, we can move on from it. You also really just need to like use your supervision, negotiate rules, kind of talk about some of these things before they happen. Like talk about, hey group, what's going to happen if somebody talks about religion and someone else doesn't agree? How will we address that? So those things will come up as they'll come up in the group, but there's a few things that you can kind of front load at the end, like creating group norms, telling people that confrontation is okay and it's expected, but this is how we'll handle it, and then following through with that. So think to yourself, I mean, we have a list right here of what makes a good group, but you probably have some intuitive sense of what a good group feels like. So if you just kind of like check in with your feelings right now, just imagine the last time that you were in a group of people. It doesn't have to be like a therapy group if you haven't had experience doing that. Maybe like if you were in a classroom where you felt that it was safe enough for you to make disclosures, but also challenging that you were growing. That's kind of the happy medium that we want ourselves in. We want people to be able to grow. We want people to be able to learn, but also have boundaries and checks on their behavior. So we can't just be doing whatever we want to do all the time. And we also need to make sure that everybody has kind of equal amounts of space. So in a group, there's naturally people who talk more, naturally people who talk less. We want those people to be brought in the middle a little bit. So everyone should be a little uncomfortable, but also experiencing some growth. I think one thing that really I've seen not go well with agencies is continuity and follow-up. My experience, we would do mandatory groups. I used to work as like a career counselor in Minnesota for like their I don't remember what it's called in Arizona. Basically, it's cash assistance for families. So they were required to do a certain number of hours of job search activity for the state in order to get their cash benefits. So this is a mandated program because people needed that money to live. So they wouldn't have come and met with us if they didn't have to. Some people might have. Some people actually liked us, but that was the rare. That was rare. So we decided to do Job Club as a way for a lot of people to get hours at the same time, but also just to kind of like help each other, do some support. And so what was nice about it was that we had it was pretty open. Like it was drop in. You could drop in, you could come out. So if someone got a job, they would stop going because they didn't need it anymore. The problem though was that we didn't have like a consistent follow-up with people who were getting employed. And so a lot of times the same pitfalls would happen again. Like they had lost their previous job because of lack of consistent childcare, and then they lost the next job. So I really think that we should have done more follow-up, but the program was not designed in that way. A lot of programs don't design follow-up as part of it because of the metrics that you're getting paid based on. So in our program, we would get more incentives from the state based on how many people were employed, not how long they were employed per se. There was a bit of an incentive there, but not as much. So anyway, that's kind of in the weeds, but you'll probably know at the agencies that you work at or where you're interning. It's an interesting thing to just actually ask about, like, what are the metrics that are paying for this group to occur? Because you'll kind of see those influence how the group functions or doesn't function. So ideal world, we have groups that are made to like promote healing, but how do you measure healing? How do you pay for it? Because we have to pay for things. So we're looking at not too flexible, not too rigid, somewhere in between. Okay, so like I said before, a group is a social microcosm. So we can think of a group as like a little, like what do they call those when you get plants that are all together in like a little biome, sort of like that. It's like a little version of real life. So there's a very good YouTube series called Group. It's just called Group. And it's led by a man who is actually like a psychoanalyst, and he's led groups for years and years under Yalom's method. Yalom is like a writer who writes, and a psychotherapist who writes about group work. Irvin Yalom, I think his name is. It's either Irvin or Irving. Someone will look it up. So that series is really good, I think, at capturing how like a psychoanalytic group would work. It's a group of people, they're meeting in New York City, and it actually follows them over the course of pre-pandemic to during pandemic. But like what they do a lot of is identify how someone in the group will cause an emotional reaction in one person, and then they'll say like, wow, what you just said made me really mad. And then the group leader will help them kind of explore that. And then they might say, yeah, it really reminds me of like how my wife puts me down. So people are able to kind of see how others in the group are stand-ins for real life people, which is something that we'll experience, right? Like if you struggle with asserting yourself and saying no to people, you'll probably struggle within a group context. If that group actually gets close enough for you to be able to have that experience, you'll probably have that same struggle. So traumas, people will perform their roles like family roles. You'll see that happen. It's kind of like a little family sometimes. So I really like to talk about Virginia Satir. If you want to go on YouTube, she has some videos. She's very confrontational, which is funny because I'm from Minnesota. She's from Wisconsin, and people are like not very confrontational. So I imagine people were terrified of her. She was also, I think she's deceased. She was also like extremely tall. She's like 6'2". So she like would mold people, like family sculpting. That's where this comes from. She would have a room of people, and you can see videos of her in trainings where they're like fellow therapists. But I think there's a couple of her in family therapy, but she'll grab someone and like and like change their body posture to fit like the narrative that's going on with the family, so people can actually kind of feel like maybe one person in the family will say, I feel like you're accusing me. So then Satir would go in and have the person like pointing at them and see how that felt for the person pointing and the person being pointed at. And then she would like redo the whole family structure depending on each person's perspective. So she's very physical dynamic. So she talked about these coping stances. So in this visual here, we have 3 different domains. We have the self, we have the other, and we have context. So we don't have the 5th coping stance here because that's the leveling, that's ideal. So it would ideally just be like a person being comfortable. So there's no dynamic like depiction of it. But so what we want is to have all 3 in balance, that we're noticing the self, noticing others, and noticing the context, and we're behaving in that way. So people who negate the self but notice the other in context are placating. People who negate the other but notice the self and the context are blaming. Super reasonable is negating the self and the other but just noticing the context. So this is like a very logical person. And then irrelevant is when you're negating all 3, and you'll kind of see that as like the class clown or like the person in the family who cracks a joke at an inappropriate moment. So she really kind of emphasized like the process of change within a family as well as within group work is that we have a status quo and there's something dysfunctional about it. There's something that's not working, but in a sense, this is working. It has its own function, right? So then something changes in the status quo. Maybe one person starts going to therapy and they decide, no, I'm not going to fulfill this role anymore. I'm not going to, let's say the person was enabling the alcoholism of their father. Okay. So in that setting, the person's like, nope, I'm not going to cover for you anymore. If you are drunk and you're out driving, I'm not going to bail you out from the police station. So then there's chaos. There's some like maybe blaming. Some of the other family members are like, why aren't you doing this anymore? You're not a good son. So then they practice and they reintegrate. So this may be a positive reintegration, especially if there's a therapist involved. It could be a negative one. It could be a little bit of both. And then there's a new status quo. So ideally, we're going to a new status quo where people are not being forced into new coping stances, although that can happen. A lot of times change will come into a family, maybe like a new baby is born in a family. And then people might just kind of shift around which coping stance they use, but it's still not healthy. Okay. So high functioning groups, this is kind of repetitive. What we know of like groups that work well. So essentially what you want from groups that you're designing is you want people to know what's expected. You want them to have predictability and safety, yet also have enough freedom and I guess spontaneity that they'll be able to have authentic experiences within each other. You also need to like acknowledge that your role as the group leader is somewhat earned. It's not automatic. Your group can easily be co-opted by a powerful member of the group. And almost every group will have someone who's very vocal, who's very, I use the word powerful. It may not feel like that in the moment. It may be someone who uses power in a different way. Like sometimes I remember I used to do groups and these were voluntary, but they're kind of not voluntary. It was in another like job search type of setting. Different funding source though. So this was a group of people, is people with disabilities, but like usually severe complex disabilities. So they would get referred out to our agency. So it'd be like a combination where people